Welcome, everyone. We're pleased to have you join us for a vibrant discussion of how workforce issues are being addressed by commissions and utilities. My name is Camille Kadosh with the Regulatory Assistance Project, and I have the pleasure of moderating a fabulous panel of experts on this topic. I want to thank NARUC's Subcommittee on Regulatory and Industry Diversity for the opportunity to present this webinar. Next slide, please. This is the second in a series that started with a March webinar on how a regulatory process can advance equity. We also have a third webinar in this series in May entitled Pay As You Can, Digital Banking and Customer Affordability. This webinar will focus on the well-documented energy workforce challenges facing our industry. We are still facing the prospect of retirement of 40% of the current workforce in the next 5 years, and declining interest in energy sector jobs. We also anticipate that there will be an increasing demand for a highly trained energy workforce. The resulting bottleneck will put a strain on the utility workforce. States are pursuing many different options to understand and address energy workforce issues that span government agencies, actions by public utility commissions, and partnering with utilities. This area is also broad, with states focusing on various aspects of it, ranging from a focus on utility supplier diversity to broader workforce training and access approaches. This panel will hear from a variety of experts on this topic. I'm proud to introduce our panelists as follows. Charles Wilson is a managing partner of CW Consulting Group, and he will speak about the workforce bottleneck and challenges to overcome in order to develop a skilled, diverse energy industry workforce. Rachel Peterson is Executive Director of the California Public Utility Commission, and she will speak about the collaboration between the Commission and the State Workforce Development Board on workforce development opportunities in energy efficiency, renewable energy, building decarbonization, and transportation electrification. Janine Robinson is Director of Diversity and Community Affairs for the Illinois Commerce Commission, and she will speak about the Commission role in working with utilities on their supplier diversity reporting and opportunities in collaboration with other state agencies. Brad Banks is an energy efficiency specialist at the Michigan Public Service Commission, and he will explain how his role on the low-income work group has morphed to include broad stakeholder and utility engagement on workforce issues. And last but not least is Bridget Doctor, Manager of Policy and Outreach at Xcel Energy, and she will explain how a COVID-era request from the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission led to creation of the Power Up program in partnership with the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. I have asked our panelists to introduce themselves and to give a brief perspective on how the workforce issue is affecting them. Each panelist will speak for about 3 minutes. We will then have a few panel questions and expect to leave 30 minutes or more for your questions of the panelists. So we encourage you to provide questions for our panelists in the Q&A panel shown here. We will get to as many of your questions as possible. And now, without further ado, Charles, I'm passing it over to you.
Thank you so much, Camille, and thank you for all of you who are in attendance today. What I want to do is start with sharing with you who I am, from the standpoint of what I represent with the groups that we need to engage. Was born and raised in the South Side, Inglewood neighborhood of Chicago, to a single mother, a single parent home, and we were recipients of SNAP benefits. And the time that I was in Chicago, especially growing up in the late 80s and early 90s, the violence that we see today, the homicides, were actually twice as many, 1,000 to 1,200 per year. And I share that to paint a picture of how bleak and how grim the outlook on life was for me and many of the peers that I grew up with. We literally lived in a space of hopelessness. And had it not been for a friend of mine who, after we graduated, went to the US Navy and used me as a referral to introduce me to the Navy and the Navy Nuclear Propulsion Program, I would have never known that this opportunity within the energy sector even existed. So the first thing I really want to highlight is how important it is for messaging, how important it is for us to make people aware that are unaware that our industry even exists, and the opportunities to change and break cycles of poverty that exist because of the middle class earnings and above that we have access to. And what I've seen over the years in my work in going around the country, consulting with different utility companies, is that sometimes we can move very slow. And because of my Navy background, I may use this analogy. the aircraft carrier can move very slowly for those turns. When in the communities that we're looking to outreach to at the most robust time where there's need and there's people who need, we're at a cross section. We need that nimble submarine type of movement. And so there were companies like ComEd early in, I would say, the late 2000s, 2008, 9, and 10 that came up with underpinnings out there when we started to develop the underpinnings of what we now see as energy infrastructure academies that are sort of being adopted by various utilities. Right now, the Department of Energy has projected in just new build, and I'm speaking specifically on the nuclear side, 375,000 workers will be needed by 2035. And this is outside of what's needed in our current attrition and retirements that Camille was speaking to. So with that said, we have to be very aggressive in the way we go about the messaging and engaging and making aware communities that we hope will be the ones. And we're talking about a very unsexy, unattractive industry as it pertains to these young people that we know we want to be there. And so part of the other thing that I've seen that has contributed to, well, I'll say that we had a reset, and I said this to Camille in a previous conversation. We had a reset in 2008 where we got an extension of about 10 years because the workforce had restarted. And they were essentially looking to say, hey, we want to refill our 401ks. And that gave us that extension. So right now, what we have to do is shorten the time in which people need to take in order to get into our industry. We need to ensure that when we get those requisitions, they normally only start once a person puts in their retirement papers. We need to start that process sooner so that we can sort of backlog or backfill these roles. And that time for knowledge transfer and retention can take place before we lose that talent. And I believe these kinds of things and these type of solutions are what will help us and allow us to be prepared for what we know is the shortage that we already anticipate and that we'll need moving forward with a robust pipeline of individuals. So I'll stop there and yield the rest of the time to the panel.
Thank you so much, Charles. I really appreciate that introduction. Rachel, you are next.
Thank you very much, Camille and everyone. Hello, everybody. I'm Rachel Peterson. I'm the Executive Director of the California Public Utilities Commission. Our mission is to set the policy and rules for the utility services that are essential to modern life in California. I'm excited to be here to talk about our efforts to prepare California's workforce to access well-paying jobs in the energy sector. I did provide a slide for today's webinar mostly so that everybody could have links to the resources that I'll mention today. And these are really the resources that have guided our workforce development efforts. The arc of our story since 2020 has been from a framework set by Governor Newsom to strategies that we've deployed across 2020 to 2023 and a new alignment that we're making in 2024. At the core, our strategy is to leverage our position as a regulator. We are looking to increase access to well-paying high-road jobs within the clean energy transition that California is making. This became a real priority after Governor Newsom issued Executive Order 7920 in 2020. There, the governor specifically linked many climate-driven actions that California is taking across multiple sectors to what he terms a just transition. That means a sustainable, inclusive, and equitable economic future. And we took that as our framework for action. So as far as strategy goes, what we've been doing is trying to find workforce development opportunities and requiring energy utilities to invest in workforce development as part of the design of our regulations and programs. One example is our Solar on Multifamily Affordable Housing Program, which requires project developers to include trainees in their projects. We also approved funding for training programs such as the Rural Regional Energy Network's Climate Careers and Clean Energy Academy. On the safety side, we have used enforcement orders to require utilities to invest in training and certification of vegetation management crews, which is a major area of need in California as we seek to reduce wildfire risk. If you take a look at our white paper that we've linked here, there are many more examples of us designing programs to catalyze that workforce development. I'll stop there. Thanks you very much again, Camille, for having me as part of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Janine, transitioning to you.
Thank you, Camille. Hi, my name is Janine Robinson. I am Director of Diversity and Community Affairs with the Illinois Commerce Commission. My role at the commission includes working with the utilities and other companies within the energy industry regarding ICC Supplier Diversity Initiative. I've been with the commission for approximately 4.5 years. Section 5-117 of our Public Utility Acts requires gas, electric, and water utilities with at least 100,000 customers in its authority to submit an annual supplier diversity report. Today, we will talk about, today's conversation will focus on our 6 largest utility companies, where their reports must be detailed information regarding actual spending on diverse suppliers, a breakdown of their women, minority, and veteran spend, their diversity goals, challenges, and concerns. You can find these reports on our website. Over the years, on average, there's been a steady increase in supplier diversity spending with our 6 largest utilities, not yet for those companies. Last year, reflecting our 2022 spend, collectively, these companies have a little over $2 billion in diverse spend, and that's approximately 45% of their total spend. In the beginning, I went on a listening tour, met with community stakeholders, various organizations, and utility companies to get an idea of their challenges and concerns regarding our supplier diversity initiative and how we can help. The commission is very committed to the supplier diversity initiative, specifically ensuring businesses headquartered in Illinois can participate in these opportunities. What we do is we receive the reports, we do a deep dive and analyze the reports. I meet with the commissioners to discuss the reports, what's improved, what's steady, what's changed. The commissioners, I, and other staff have one-on-one meetings with the representatives from the utility companies to discuss our findings, concerns, and give kudos accordingly. The last step per legislation is we hold a public policy session. This is where the CEOs or the presidents of the utility companies share their highlights of their diverse spend overall, best practices, adjustments, strides, challenges, and plans going forward. And then we usually have a second panel of the policy session that entails members from community organizations, state agencies, et cetera. It's something that helps both utility company and the businesses. And in addition to the process, I connect and build relationships with community stakeholders and various organizations throughout Illinois to ensure they are aware of these opportunities. And I would also like to note, because of the legislation and their goals to increase supplier diversity, these 6 utilities have created a council, Illinois Utility Business Diversity Council. It's a resource for best practice sharing, information exchange among the Illinois utilities, with a focus on advancing growth and utilization of diverse businesses in the state of Illinois. Thank you for having me. I look forward to being part of the panel.
Thank you, Janine. Next, we are going to hear from Brad.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Brad Banks, and I am the Energy Efficiency Specialist for the Energy Waste Reduction section at the Michigan Public Service Commission. I am also the chair of the EWR Low Income Work Group, which was started in April of 2018. So we just had our 6th anniversary. We were approached by outside stakeholder groups in late 17 and early 18 about creating this a low income work group where we could have a forum to discuss with the stakeholder groups, all of the utilities, the regulated utilities, and many of the municipals and co-ops throughout the state, and then a large swath of different government agencies. And so that's how we got up, and we got going from the initial 50 people who showed up to the first meeting to we have well over 450 people involved now. And we have multiple state agencies representing the Weatherization Assistance Program, the housing agencies, lead abatement, And one of the things that we've worked on is and discovered really is kind of the intersectionality of all of these things that have to play in it's not just in energy efficiency, but how they all can all come together to improve housing and the health and safety along the way. We have a couple of working subcommittees that actually do the work outside of the meetings. And one of those is in workforce development. We started that just a little over 2 years ago now, as it became really evident while working closely with the Weatherization Assistance Program, all of the utility implementation contractors for their energy efficiency programming, and some of the third-party stakeholder groups, that they're all competing for the same contractors and there's not enough of them to go around. And so that's why we initially started that up, and to look at what we can do, both as the state agencies, how the utilities can be involved, and with and getting the stakeholder groups involved. So the workforce development right now, we've got a couple of different things going on where we have, with the utilities, are working on developing energy efficiency academies. Down in Detroit, they have they're working with a Walker Miller Energy company and have run 5 cohorts through now. We're developing a statewide needs assessment for what it is in the workforce, where in the state, and what's missing, what can be done to boost the workforce. And we are talking primarily about energy efficiency, weatherization on single and multifamily housing. And that's been the focus in getting the implementation contractors certified and out in the field where they can actually start working. And so that's been the focus of what we've got. I guess I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Brad. Bridget.
Hello, I'm Bridget Doctor with Xcel Energy and the Manager of Policy and Outreach. I've worked with the Xcel Energy Power Up pilot program since its inception in 2021. And you can go to the next slide, please. While the Power Up program has its first 2 cohorts graduating on May 3rd, so coming up here really soon, the program development goes back much further. Early in the pandemic, in 2020, Xcel Energy responded to the Minnesota Public Utility Commission's request for utilities to submit projects that, if accelerated, would help spur the economy. At that time, the company proposed about $3 billion in project investments, many of them needing construction contractors. In response to our proposal, stakeholders asked we create a workforce program that focused on diversifying the construction industry, recognizing the need to replace the current retiring workforce. In response to stakeholders, we proposed a $4 million program and created the framework with Minnesota DEED that Camille referenced earlier, who is also our program administrator, allowing for 2 cohorts and a total of 150 participants with a targeted focus on people of color, women, and veterans. And the pilot includes outreach and training from 7 community-based organizations, including pre-apprenticeship training and a direct path to the Minnesota building trades. Next slide, please. To measure the program's success, we work with stakeholders to develop the evaluation metrics shown here. We're looking to not only show how many went through the program, but really what's the impact after and their employment outcomes. Next slide, please. You can see by the stats of this first cohort that the participants are majority male. We weren't able to engage any veterans. African Americans are the largest racial makeup, and over half the participants identified as falling within low-income guidelines. Next slide, please. Some of our successes and challenges are listed here. I did hear on Monday that we lost more than 10% and will lose more before graduation, but we're still really happy with how many participants have made it through the program. Now it's about moving on to jobs and apprenticeships. Collaboration with the Minnesota Trades is critical to connecting these graduates to apprenticeships and those jobs, and that's done through one of our partners, Building Strong Communities. Recruitment was difficult. Potential participants stated that they had conflicts with attending classes throughout the term of the program because of other commitments. Cost per participant was really pretty high at about $26,000 per participant versus what I'm told from DEED they see for a somewhat comparable program of about $10,000 to $15,000 per participant. And this type of workforce training program for general construction, so not our internal workforce, is not something that the company has done before, and it's proven to be a challenge. So it may be more effective to partner in alternative ways with organizations whose purpose is workforce development, whereas ours is to deliver energy to your homes and businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget, and thank you to all of our panelists. This group was selected to be able to provide different perspectives on the workforce issue in different ways that commissions and people in this field are addressing the workforce challenges. So I wanted to come back to ask the panel here. This audience for NARUC is utility commissions, utility staff, and some industry experts. But from your position, either within the commissions, as a utility, as workforce training experts, what recommendations do you have for what the commissions should focus on in this area? And I'd like to go, I think, in order of how we went through the panel as well. So Charles?
Thank you again, Camille. I think it's a great question. I think one of the things that I've observed over the decade or so that I've done this is that there's not a lot of communication on the federal side between the Department of Labor and the Department of Energy. Funding, and I'm speaking to what Rachel shared, it has not been there for specific Department of Energy type workforce things. The Department of Labor, in some instances, don't acknowledge some roles that are in the energy sector. And in addition to that, the way that utilities actually do training, we don't, in most cases, additional RAP or registered apprenticeship program within a utility or a company. They have their own internal qualification process that does not go into submitting hours and things to the state, because that could sometimes be cumbersome. And as a result of that, we miss training dollars and opportunities that could go into helping to build up that workforce without the utility companies have to carry the burden financially in that. So I would say that's a pretty big one right there, is the communication for potential funding sources. And again, that awareness to those communities that you want to get to, having someone credible that can penetrate and bring those people to pull from.
All right, thanks for that. Rachel, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I feel like I'll be teeing off of both Charles and Bridget here. You know, it's not our core skill set either. Workforce development for a utility commission, you know, it's not something that we traditionally had done until the governor began to ask all agencies to start thinking about this. And one thing that I think benefited us a lot was the memorandum of understanding that we set out with the California Workforce Development Board. They have that expertise where we don't. And so we've been able to consult with them as we're looking at writing orders and designing programs, and consult with them to ask them, does this make sense? Is this a viable pathway to stimulate some of that workforce development? And so I think, though, also to Charles's messaging and awareness point, I do also believe that the community colleges, the community college system in California is a very important system for us to be thinking about and deploying here. And so where our enforcement orders required utilities to fund community college programs, say in vegetation management, I believe that those are some of the ways that that we're trying to catalyze that outside the utility companies, outside the commissions, in the broader economy.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go to you next, Brad, but I'd also encourage our participants and listeners to put questions that they have in the Q&A tab. Really encourage that as well. Brad.
I'll start off with the fact that, Michigan just passed some new legislation for energy efficiency that got signed into law just before the end of the year and went into effect in February. And part of the energy waste reduction law now addresses both health and safety issues and workforce development. And so we're tackling about how the utilities can actually do workforce development without just spending money, without getting any savings or anything else back from it. And so we're working that one out. But what has worked so well with my low income work group is just that we let the stakeholders take the lead in this. And both of the subcommittees that we have going are actually chaired by outside stakeholders. It's not by me and it's not by somebody else from the state. And the state agencies participate in it. And I'm certainly attending. We always have regular attendance from the weatherization program, lead abatement, several Department of Health and Human Service agencies. And what we can do for the commission is promote all of the connection making. All of our utilities will tell us that they have benefited over the years from making these new connections, that their program in energy efficiency has completely changed by having a better interaction and working with the third-party stakeholder groups. And we facilitate that as much as possible. We early in the when the very beginning of these meetings, we had some stakeholders who thought these meetings were a good opportunity to bash their local utility. And so we had to put a stop to that and so put some parameters up that that's not what the meetings are for. But kind of letting the stakeholders take the lead on what is important and how they see it, as opposed to having the state tell them what they need, has worked out in the long run for us so far. I mean, we're still going.
All right, thank you. Bridget, thoughts?
Thank you, Camille. A couple of thoughts, kind of tapping onto what Rachel had said, and I assume the Workforce Development Board is comparable to Minnesota's DEED, the Department of Employment and Economic Development. Minnesota, or DEED, received a rather large amount of appropriations this last year, direct appropriations, specifically focused on workforce diversity. And they've been working through different grant cycles this year. It's in their 23 fiscal year. So I truly believe that they are the right place to house that and manage that. But there's absolutely also a right place for the utilities and other stakeholders to work with them to how do we enhance it and collaborate on it. Working with stakeholders is key. Diverse stakeholders is key, not just the utilities, not just the trades, not just the community-based organizations, keeping them all a part of that conversation. Also, one of the programs that DEED has as well is they have a subset of that. They received $112 million for their budget on workforce diversity this year. 18 million of that goes to a program that focuses on small organizations providing training to diversity in the workforce. So very, very targeted approaches all over the board that DEED is trying on workforce development, all funding through the state of Minnesota. Again, I think those collaborative efforts and keeping that dialogue going is really important. And just one other really quick thing to add to that, Minnesota, this just filed in March, the utilities are required to submit for the first time a workforce a workforce diversity and supplier diversity plan, similar to what you work with, Janine. And so this was our first report, and it's a new process, but getting that data, I don't think anything starts without data. So getting that data and then determining those next steps. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Again, a plug for questions to come into the chat here. But I wanted to dig a little bit more into perhaps a little bit on the workforce diversity angle, or what different aspects you took within your programs, your diverse programs that we're talking about here, right? Diverse approaches that we've had. What are some, like, in hindsight, it was like a key step that like really made what you are currently doing work? What was something that you would recommend that is going well within your program, or it's something that you figured out perhaps after the fact that like, wow, I'm really glad we added that element to the program that you were working on? I'll take this popcorn style for anyone who wants to answer.
Okay, I'll start. So one of the goals of the Power Up program is to be able to provide apprenticeships, and we're looking at family sustaining wages. And the key to that was engaging the Minnesota building trades. So it was critical that we were able to make sure that we had their buy-in with the program. And one of the trainers is Building Strong Communities, who is a direct conduit to the Minnesota building trades. So we did, in the preparation, a big part of that was how do we get this to work for everyone, to make sure that these graduates have that opportunity on the flip side, when they're done, that they can get an apprenticeship.
Thank you. Key message point there.
Okay. A couple of things that we've learned when I say we, I have a team that works with me to analyze the reports, is at the beginning, we would look at the appendix of the report. And if there were a lot of zeros, that are a lot of categories that did not have a diverse spend, we would point that out to the utility company, and the utility company would then implement an intentional plan so that they could reduce the number of categories that had zero spend. Another thing is, when I have the second panels for the policy sessions, it's usually dependent on what the focus is or what stands out in the report. So for instance, some of the main challenges that the businesses and the utility companies have is access to capital for the small businesses or for the diverse businesses to be able to participate in the project. So last year, I had our state agency, the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. They have a division called the Office of Minority and Economic Empowerment. And they have specific managers that focus on African American, Latina, or Latinx, women, and Pacific Islanders. And so they were able to come on to let people know of the programs and that they have in place and the resources that they have for businesses to be able to participate. And so one of the things is businesses or organizations that have members, that can participate in this and the opportunities. They were able to go meet with them and learn of the resources. And then the utility companies decided to partner with them so that they can help the businesses that they have, because they have programs in place to help with their supply diversity initiative. Those are just a couple of things.
Thank you, Janine. Any other panel responses to a key element of what you think is part of a successful program?
I'll hop in, Camille. This is Rachel. You know, workforce development can reach in so many different directions and touch so many different sectors. I believe that for an organization like the California Public Utilities Commission, we ourselves are a large employer and we are regulating other large employers. And for me, that means that clarity of being part of the state overall push. What is California statewide setting out as its own goals for economic development and workforce development? And staying close to that and adhering ourselves and aligning ourselves with the state goals, to me, makes it easier then to hone and make sure that our own commission staff are focused on designing programs for utilities that utilities have to implement that are consistent with where the state wants to go as a whole.
I would follow up on that, Camila. And because this is, for Michigan, this is pretty new. When we started our workforce development subcommittee a couple of years ago, I mean, we were kind of ahead of the curve of the state. The state really hadn't gotten there yet. And so we're kind of in the opportunity right now where, especially with the new legislation, where we can kind of shape where we want to go with it, as long as we're willing to kind of screw some stuff up along the way, and do it wrong. And so that's kind of where we're at, and getting things up and moving. And there was a question in the Q&A thing about the reaching out to the high school students, and that's brand spanking new with us too. And we're trying to figure that out as well. And so that's not particularly a helpful answer on my part, but that's where we're at.
Thank you for that. Charles, did I see that you had some thoughts on this? Key
Yeah,
elements.
just well, I'm speaking more from on a practitioner side, the at the ground level of engagement. At the end of the day, the participation or the butts in the seats are what ultimately we're trying to get to. And I would say the things that I've observed that are effective is, especially when you think of what Bridget and Rachel have shared, with the partnering and the stakeholder component, the credibility that these stakeholders have, especially if you do, I think, which is the most effective, sort of outsource to these community partners, these stakeholder partners that sort of specialize in training, is as they do recruitment, having the employer or employers, also some of their subcontracting firms present at recruitment events to show that it's real, to speak to what the real job opportunities are, because it says this is actually going to happen. And then within whatever that window of training or preparation is, that there are like several touch points by higher level people within the organization that come to share what the opportunities are, to also give that credibility. So I think those are some things that have been very effective in not just getting people, but retaining and reducing that attrition that inevitably comes with some 5, 6, 10 week type program when you're getting people ready.
Thank you for that. There's been some excellent questions in the chat here. I'm wondering if you have thoughts on, there's some questions on what level is this? Brad, you mentioned this, high school is kind of brand new to you guys, but the question is it high school? Is it mid-career? Is it folks transitioning careers? And also, how do you reach more women? How do you reach more minorities? those types of questions for how do you engage here? Charles, you started to talk about this. It's outreach, it's stakeholder engagement. If anybody can speak to a little bit more on the nuts and bolts of how you do that, that'd be helpful.
Since I'm running my mouth, I'll just start and close my sort of bookend it. It really does come down to something we talked about, Camille, when I said the message and the messenger. They have to be aligned. They have to be individuals who represent, I think, whatever the background is for the targeted audience, and being able to be a muse or having been successful in the career path that the utilities may be offering at that time. If that's a woman, I think, and I'm biased toward nuclear. If you can find a senior reactor operator or a licensed operator that's a woman, as you go into engaging women in nuclear, YWCA, and some other sort of larger groups, I think that helps in being attractive. I would also say, when I spoke about us being unsexy, unattractive, it starts with us not using our sort of boilerplate template words, like you can have a great career with some great benefits. We have to be very specific in drilling down on what we're saying is meant to attract these groups, these youth, these returning citizens, these veterans. We have to be very, very clear in our language and with transparency. Some people don't even know what a benefit is. So if we get into that level of communication when we're doing outreach and awareness campaigns, I think those are the kinds of things that will attract and maintain interest, and then maintain relationships. Some people don't know what a network is. And so that means that if we have people that are continuing to touch, going into 8th grade or middle school, saying things about energy careers, going into the high schools, and then essentially connecting mentors with them, I think that'll help as well.
Thank you. Any other input on that question?
I'll go real quick. And I know some of the challenges that Bridget ran into with what she spoke about earlier. With the Energy Efficiency Academy that's been kicked off and run for the last year and a half now, one of the things that they have done is that they're providing stipends for people to actually afford to go, because elsewise, they can't do both. They can't go to work and go to the training. They've had a very high placement rate, not 100%, but pretty darn close. For is when people have graduated, and so they're facilitating that as well. One of the other challenges that they've run into is transportation. Either people don't have transportation, or you're running into people whose driver's licenses have been suspended because they don't have insurance on their car and they've had too many tickets, and so they automatically get suspended. It's been a very high washout rate for the initial applicants for that reason alone. So that's been really challenging.
Brad, if I could tap in on that one too, and thank you for that. One of the things that the Power Up program did is we do have a larger budget for wraparound services like that. We didn't do a direct stipend. We wanted funding to go for reaching milestones, not just for showing up, but going through and reaching milestones. So participants who stuck with the program and then reached different milestones, and they were to be determined by the different organizations providing the training. It was part of the RFP process, have received funding throughout. And we also have a allowance for vehicles, and it could be for vehicle repair. It could be, for help purchasing a vehicle, understanding that people need reliable transportation. If they need to get to a job, they have to have transportation to get to a job. It's just a critical component, along with those wraparound services that these CBOs are helping them as a navigator get that driver's license if they don't have it for some reason, and helping them work through all of those pieces. So yeah, I agree. Those are just really important components that we have found that participants have needed, and they have definitely used that portion of the funding.
Thank you. So I'll note that these are varied and different aspects of how commissions, states, utilities are approaching this issue. And it's new, right? This is kind of a changing landscape, we're adapting on the fly. And these are some new areas for your agencies, for utilities to be thinking about. So one of the questions in the chat was, for people that are new to this, commissions that are new to this, utilities, what's an easy but effective low-hanging fruit in this area? What are some good first steps that you guys who've been in this a little bit would recommend?
I'll jump in first here, Camille. And I think it's kind of consistent with what I've been noting, which is that each of our states does have an overall strategy. And linking in and aligning with that strategy has, to my mind, for at least the CPUC, yielded more benefit. We're not on our own in this space. There are professionals who've been working on this for quite some time. California, I noticed, kind of does workforce development and for a number of years, and then rethinks it and does it again. And that's understandable because we're all adapting to changes in technology and industry and all sorts of other things going on. So another link I had on the slide is to the Jobs First Council. So California is asking 13 different regions around the state what they want to do next in creating jobs for Californians. Once again, still heading towards that goal of high road, well-paying jobs in the energy sector and beyond. And so our next move really is to participate with those regions as they set out what they want to do for their regions in economic development, so that, again, we have a feedback loop that we know where we can deploy our authority as a regulator to make sure utilities are participating with those efforts.
I'd like to say something really quick. Recently, I became the DEI coordinator for our agency. In Illinois, we have a commission on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the things is they have DEI coordinators from various agencies, and they have peer-to-peer meetings to discuss their goals, similar to what Rachel was saying that California is doing. It's the same thing that similar to what the state is doing with the different agencies. What plans or what goals do these agencies have? How do they want to move forward with it? And then it's just the rest of us either pitching in ideas or just sharing thoughts and strategies with them. So that's some of the things that our state is doing or the agencies are doing to help increase our workforce diversity.
Camille, I'll just add real quickly too, that, reaching out and learning about groups that have been doing this stuff, for a while now has really helped us out a lot. In Michigan, there's a Michigan Energy Workforce Development Consortium, which has always been operating about bringing people to work for the utilities, whether it's as a lineman or some other position in skilled trades and for the utilities. But now they're starting to kind of look outwards too, and at energy efficiency and weatherization and renewable energy and those kind of things. And so aligning yourself with people who've already been, there's no reason to recreate the wheel when other people have, did it 10 years ago. And that's kind of helped us out a lot. And I know I mentioned a minute ago about that. We're working on a needs assessment survey to go out all over the state. And I don't know why we didn't think of that before, because we don't know who's out there doing what or where or what kind of training that they're doing. And this really just came up like in the last couple of months, and that we started working on that. So if you don't know what's going on, I don't know how you can fix it.
Good point. Second to the last question, I wanted to ask, is there any lessons learned? Maybe an area that you tried and learned that maybe that's not the best fit? Something that listeners can maybe learn from to perhaps think about in more detail before they attempt themselves. Any cautionary tales?
I have one that it's not even complete, but we just don't really have a good grasp on measuring. How do we measure success? And really, that's an area that I've been talking to our colleagues at the Workforce Development Board about. How do we figure out whether we have developed the workforce that can do the building electrification, install EV chargers, install all the various energy, the on the ground energy and electric and gas infrastructure that we need. It's a little still TBD on how well we can measure it.
This is Charles. I would lessons learned is the amount of time that is taken from funding that may come from various sources. There's infrastructure dollars, clean energy dollars, some other, get back recovery dollars. The amount of time from when it's there, and essentially said it's present, to the time that it gets to ultimately the individuals who engage the workers that we hope would be. We can sometimes be looking at 1 or 2 years, and a lot can change for people in that period of time. And those who may have been interested may no longer be interested. They may have started other career pathways, and we've maybe lost a huge group of qualified individuals. So I would say taking too long, meeting about the meetings can in itself sometimes create an issue where we lose interest with qualified candidates that some of these based organizations, these stakeholders probably had teed up and ready.
Thank you. Any other thoughts here? Lessons learned? All right, we are getting close to the top of the hour here. And I'm going to ask a final question of the panelists. I also encourage panelists to type answers to some of the remaining questions that aren't in here. And I'm also going to encourage panelists, if they would like to put in any contact information that they have in case other people here in the call have questions that they want to follow up, as well as to place any resources that they mentioned in the chat as well. But I'd like to ask panelists, what is one key takeaway that you want everybody here to think about on this issue? Whether this is a recommendation for the commission, whether this is thinking about a program, what is this the last thing that you who are experts and have been spending some time in this field want listeners to think about on this workforce issue?
For me, I'm sorry, it's Charles. For me, I would say the need is there, the people are there. There's just not the education and the awareness isn't there. So the true promotion and engagement is the number one thing that I'm hoping that the commissions that are here and how they engage with the utilities, that piece and how effective, from feedback, surveys on afterwards, how effective that engagement was and the follow-up that went with it. It's really the education, I would say that.
I'd like to say from a supplier diversity perspective that implementing a supplier diversity program is always beneficial to the company. It helps create a stronger industry, stronger communities, economic growth. And then for the diverse businesses, they have an opportunity to become innovative, grow, expand, and become more sustainable in the future. And I know that one of the success stories that the utility companies have is they may have a matchmaker or a prime contractor's secondary contractor meeting, and maybe that subcontractor wasn't able to do business with the utility company, but because of that interaction, they met with another prime, and they were able to do business through another industry. So it's always beneficial, the communication and the programs that they have in place is really good for everyone involved.
Thank you.
I would say the communication is key, and I think Janine tapped into it a little bit here too, but whether it's communication with, utility to utility, utility to stakeholder, for us, deed to the utilities and other stakeholders, just making sure that folks are communicating about what is available, what are options out there, communicating different programs, how we're working with different groups, making sure that those channels are open.
Thank you. Brad or Rachel?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of similar, is listen to the stakeholder groups, the public-private, nonprofit groups out there. There's a lot of smart people in the energy and energy efficiency sector that are not utility or government, and so listen to what they've got to say, and it has helped out our utilities a lot. And and I say it, and it sounds kind of glib, but get out of their way. Don't be the government that's standing in the way of actually accomplishing things. The fact that we have government agencies that talk to each other now and work together, I mean, that was unheard of. And so there's a lot of opportunity there. And while I'm here, I don't know how to change the chat so that I can put out my email address to everyone.
That's covered. Rachel.
Sorry, I was focused on answering a question in the chat. So but I want to say you actually got a really great range of thoughts from my co-panelists. So nothing to add. Thank you, Camille.
All right, thank you. We're almost at the end of our time here, and I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank our wonderful panelists for sharing their thoughts on this new and exciting issue that I think we'll be talking about for many years to come. I want to reassure attendees that this is going to be available on the NABERC website, the recording and the slides, and encourage everyone to reach out with any additional questions, and hope to see you at the third in this series in May. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for your participation and attention.